Good evening, I'm Fana Shea and this is AWANI Tonight. Second booster for COVID-19 allowed for those aged 50 to 59. And a UN report revealed 84 million children still at risk of being out of school by 2030. That's coming up. Prime Minister Datuk Seri Ismail Sabri Yaakob gave his assurance that the government will protect the country's assets using all channels available following claims by the purported heirs of the Sulu Sultanate. He said Malaysia will protect its assets through legal channels and that the government will not compromise in defending the country's rights and sovereignty. On July 12, the assets of two Petronas subsidiaries in Azerbaijan were reportedly seized by the Sulu Group, who are claiming 62.3 billion ringgit from Malaysia. The move is part of legal efforts launched in 2017 by the Sulu heirs to receive compensation over land in Sabah, which they claim their ancestors had leased to a British trading company in 1878. The mechanism for targeted fuel subsidies is now in the early stages of testing. Finance Minister Tengku Datuk Seri Zafrul Tengku Abdul Aziz says it will take another 3 to 6 months of study before it can be implemented.
Perbangunan dan pengujian sistem subsidi bersasar juga dijangka memerlukan tempoh lebih kurang 3 hingga 6 bulan sebelum kita betul-betul bersedia untuk dilaksanakan di seluruh negara. Dalam pelaksanaan subsidi bersasar ini, kerajaan juga akan merancang pelaksanaan ini secara berfasa bagi memastikan ianya tidak mengakibatkan inflasi secara mendadak yang seperti disebut tadi atau menjejaskan momentum pertumbuhan ekonomi kita.
The testing, he said, will be followed by more extensive evaluation in terms of other methods as well as determining the feasibility of such a mechanism, not only in urban areas but also rural areas. Meanwhile, the Finance Minister said Malaysia's ability to increase its level of indebtedness is limited compared to developed nations with much lower debt service ratios. According to him, the country's ratio of debt service payments to revenue reached 16.3% in 2021 and based on budget 2022 is expected to exceed 18%. This means that for every 1 ringgit of government revenue, almost 20 cents is used for paying interest on debts, and this is apart from the ability to repay the principal amounts on loans taken by the government. Putrajaya denies claims of failing to adhere to conditions under the MOU for the intake of Indonesian maids. Human Resources Minister Datuk Seri M. Saravanan says there was no condition that outlines the abolishment of the maid online system MOS. He added that the two countries are now looking to integrate their systems for hiring maids under the One Channel System, OCS.
Tiada sebarang syarat untuk memasukkan sistem sedia ada. Apa yang telah dinyatakan dalam MOU adalah menggunakan sistem yang sedia ada di Indonesia untuk pengambilan pekerja asing. Tetapi ia tidak mensyaratkan kita akan masukkan sistem yang kita ada. Semalam kita telah adakan perbincangan dengan pihak Indonesia dan bersetujui supaya kita akan integrasikan sistem yang sedia ada dengan KDN dan sistem yang dicanangkan oleh Indonesia.
Saravanan was responding to Seremban MP Anthony Lok's question on Indonesia's temporary freeze on all workers entering Malaysia due to an alleged breach of MOU signed in April. Saravanan said that it was not a freeze, but a temporary postponement. Indonesian Ambassador Hermono had claimed that Malaysian Immigration Department continued to use the MOS to recruit Indonesian maids instead of the one-channel system as agreed by both countries.
Due to a recent surge in COVID-19 cases, Putrajaya is allowing second vaccine booster shots for those aged 50 to 59 years without any comorbidities. Health Minister Khairi Jamaluddin says this is part of the recommendation by the Technical Working Committee.
Previously, a second booster was only allowed for those aged 60 and above with comorbidities and those who are traveling overseas. Those aged 60 and above with or without comorbidities may also opt for the second booster upon medical advice. Senior citizens living in long-term care facilities, high-risk individuals aged 18 to 59, as well as frontline workers are also eligible for a second booster dose. Kyrie said his ministry is considering the usage of new second-generation vaccines if they receive approval from health regulatory bodies.
Sekiranya didapati vaksin ini berkesan dan selamat, yang dibangunkan, vaksin yang dibangunkan untuk varian seperti Omicron dan sebagainya, mungkin perolehan boleh dipertimbangkan untuk masa yang akan datang. Untuk makluman yang berhormat, kita sudah pun perkembangkan pemberian Paxlovid sampailah ke peringkat daerah-daerah dan juga termasuklah di negeri.
Kyrie also said there is no need to tighten SOPs at this point in time. However, Putrajaya may consider doing so if COVID cases continue to rise.
Buat masa ini, kita berpandangan bahawa cukup setakat kita memberi reminder ataupun peringatan kepada orang ramai untuk terus patuh kepada SOP yang masih ada. Contohnya pemakaian pelitup muka di dalam kawasan yang tertutup. Tetapi namun demikian, sekiranya kes semakin meningkat, maka perlu kerajaan buat keputusan untuk pertimbangkan sama ada nak diperketatkan lagi SOP ataupun tidak. Tetapi saya harap bahawa pematuhan rakyat secara sukarela, secara kawalan kendiri dapat dimantapkan tanpa perlu ada apa-apa paksaan dan juga penguatkuasaan.
We will go for a quick break. Stay with us.
COVID-19 memperlihatkan kepada kita betapa pantasnya adaptasi teknologi di kalangan PKS kita. Niaga AWANI dan Unified Business akan menyelami perjalanan kebangkitan semula PKS kita melalui segmen Jiwa SME setiap Selasa dan Khamis untuk inspirasi anda.
Transformasikan perniagaan dengan Unified Business, rakan digital pilihan anda. Hubungi kami sekarang dan jimat sehingga 50%. Jom Unified Business.
Kekalkan kekuatan dan tenaga supaya ceria dan cergas buat apa yang kita suka. Pilihlah Nutrient Optimum dengan protein whey untuk membantu membina dan membaiki tisu badan serta pre dan probiotik. Nutrient Optimum terdapat di kedai berdekatan.
Welcome back. The COVID-19 pandemic has forced school closures around the world, impeding access to education. A UN report estimates that by 2030, 84 million children will still be at risk of being out of school. Manos Antoninis, director of the UNESCO Global Education Monitoring Report, stressed the importance of remediation to avoid prolonged negative impacts on education.
As we know, COVID-19 led to extensive school closures. We have estimated at the Global Education Monitoring Report that schools remain closed or partially closed for more than half of days globally. But that in itself is distributed very unequally between countries. We have seen very short school closures in the Pacific, but by contrast, very long school closures in South Asia and in parts of Southeast Asia. Bangladesh or the Philippines are examples of countries that kept schools closed the longest. And inevitably, that means that the learning levels of students have been severely affected because so many really did not have access to opportunities to continue their learning.
Manos also emphasized how remediation is the first step to recovery.
The obvious measure that countries need to take, given the potential severity of the situation, especially in middle-income countries in the region that had their schools closed for longest, is remediation measures. Teachers, as schools have reopened more systematically this year, need to be ready to assess where their students are, especially the more disadvantaged, because the pandemic has had a highly unequal effect. Wealthier students were able to continue their learning in one form or another. Either they had access to the internet and opportunities that their governments were offering online, or their families were supporting them at home. But those more disadvantaged, those poorest, without the means to access education from a distance and without any support at home, are likely to have had their learning levels really seriously declining.
Therefore, the education sector needs to transform in order to face the challenges that lie ahead.
We know education systems are very hard and very slow to change, but there is increasingly a call, and not just because of the pandemic, which exposed the grave risks of inequality, but also of the major challenges that we're facing today: climate change, the risk of conflict, misinformation due to the increasing use of social media and related resources. Education systems need to make a big leap forwards.
On to the international front, Britain's former finance minister Rishi Sunak held on to his lead in the race to become Britain's next prime minister after another candidate was knocked out. Conservative MPs will vote again today as they continue the process of choosing the two final candidates to replace Boris Johnson.
Sunak looks almost certain to make the final two after receiving 115 votes in the third ballot, ahead of former Defence Minister Penny Mordaunt on 82 and Foreign Secretary Liz Truss on 71. Senior backbencher Tom Tugendhat was knocked out after the vote. The Conservative Party's 358 lawmakers will whittle the field down to the final two this week, eliminating the candidate with the fewest votes each time. After a summer of campaigning by the final two contenders, the Conservative Party's 200,000 members will vote. A new Prime Minister will then be announced on September 5th.
Meanwhile, three candidates are in the race to be Sri Lanka's next president. Acting President Ranil Wickremesinghe will face the opposition-backed candidate Dulas Alahaperuma and leftist leader Anura Dissanayake in tomorrow's vote. Frontrunner Sajid Premadasa, who was earlier backed by the opposition as their candidate, has pulled out of the race, making the election to replace Gotabaya Rajapakse a close contest. Six-time Prime Minister Wickremesinghe took over as acting president after a popular uprising forced Rajapakse to flee to Singapore and resign. Protest leaders had urged opposition to field a united candidate to defeat Wickremesinghe, whose closeness with the Rajapakse family angers them. East Timor's President Jose Ramos Horta hopes that the youngest country in Asia could become a member of ASEAN next year. In a joint news conference with Indonesia's President Joko Widodo, Ramos Horta said that his government has fulfilled all necessary requirements to be the newest member of the bloc.
Timor-Leste is part of Southeast Asia. We have fulfilled many of the requirements necessary for a functioning economy, a functioning democracy. So Timor-Leste will be a productive member of ASEAN.
Ramos Horta said his country expected that Widodo would maximize his role as the chair of ASEAN next year to accelerate the acceptance of East Timor as the 11th member of the regional grouping. The former East Timor independence fighter and Nobel Peace Prize laureate, who was sworn in as president on May 20th, made his first bilateral visit overseas to Indonesia. East Timor applied for full membership of ASEAN in 2011, but ASEAN has yet to respond to the request due to its small economic size and poverty issues. Over in China, a gas explosion in a building in the northern Chinese port city of Tianjin this morning left 3 people missing and 11 injured. 3 floors of the 6-story building collapsed, with explosion heard at around 7:15 a.m. The incident remains under investigation, but it appears to point to the deterioration of infrastructure. Tianjin has long been one of China's most developed and international cities. Breakneck economic growth had boosted living standards in the port city, but development often skirted safety and environmental regulations. In 2015, a massive explosion at a chemical warehouse in Tianjin killed 173 people. Chemicals were found to be falsely registered and stored. Can PKR's new Central Leadership Council unite the fractious and divided party to recover lost political ground? Will the Anwar-Rafizi pairing prove a winning combo? Tonight on Consider This, we ask our guests about the future of PKR. That is all we have for you on Awani tonight. I'm Farhana Sheh. Thank you for watching.